Good morning. Today we will be having a short lecture starting chapter 17, which is related in a way or another to chapter 4. This one we're going to talk about the signing and marking for freeways and rural highways only. So we talked about signing on typical any streets from freeways to highways to local streets, and this chapter will be concentrating more and more on the signing and the marking only for freeways and rural highways. This is the outline for the presentation. We're going to start with the traffic marking on freeways and rural highways, and then how to establish and post the speed limits, and also some of the guidelines on how to put the signage of freeways and rural highways. So, as you could see in this picture here, this is pretty much a freeway, and there's lots of markings as you could see here. The standard lane lines are really provided to delineate lanes for travel. So, as you can see here, we're having 4 lanes in one direction, and we are having several markings. It's a dashed white line to distinguish between different lanes in the same direction. While, as you could see also, at the right edge, you see right edge markings, which consist of a solid white line to indicate that you cannot exceed this line or cannot drive on the shoulder. Same thing when it comes to the left edge marking. It also consider a solid yellow line rather than a white line. The yellow line indicating that this is the end of this of the 4 lanes going in certain direction, and there is a median, and after the median there will be a different direction. So just by looking at simple picture, as we could see here, there's a lot of marking on freeways to separate lanes in the same direction, to separate lanes from the shoulder on the right side, or to separate lanes by a yellow solid line on the left side, indicating that this is the further left lane in the same direction, and afterwards there is a different direction of travel. When it comes to rural highway markings, the MUTCD criteria, it has 2 types of markings. The center line marking, it's shall, and again shall means it's a standard that shall be placed on all paved 2-way streets or highways that have 3 or more traffic lanes. In fact, then the MUTCD give us an extra criteria here, and here it's should, so it's more of a guidance rather than a standard. So it should be placed actually on all rural arterials and collectors that have a traveled width of more than 18 feet and average daily traffic of 3,000 vehicles per day or greater. So you could see now there is a movement between a must and a guidance. So it's a standard having center line markings for all paved 2-way streets or highways that have 3 or more traffic lanes, and then it degrade from a must to a should, which is a guidance for all other rural arterials and collectors that have traveled with widths of more than 18 feet and average daily traffic of 3,000 vehicles per day or greater. When it comes to the edge lane markings, it's also a must. So the edge lane markings, it shall be placed on freeways, expressways, or rural highways with a traveled way of 20 feet or more in width and average daily traffic of 6,000 vehicles per day or greater. While this criteria become as a guidance for edge line that has to be placed on rural highways with a traveled width of 20 feet or more in width and average daily traffic of 3,000 vehicles per day. So you could see here the standards of having a center line markings as well as edge line lane markings. They are becoming a must and a standard for bigger highways, and it become as a guidelines or a guidance for more smaller rural arterials and collectors that they are handling less amount of traffic. Now in this picture here, we could see that this is one of the cases when it comes to rural highway markings that having a center line and edge markings are not needed, or they are not a must. And when does this happen? It happens if we're having 2-lane rural highways with an ADT of less than 3,000 vehicles per day, and the only types of highways for which center lines and edge lines marking need not to be used. So as you can see, we're having here 1 lane per direction, and the traffic is very low, and it's a rural highway. So once we're having all these combinations, the usage of center line and edge line markings are not really a must in this case. But as you could see, since it's a 2-lane rural highways, 1 lane per direction, we have to have what we call it a passing zone. So the markings here indicate for the drivers that if you are driving on the same side as the dashed yellow line, then you can pass at this location. While if you are driving and at your side you are driving here and the line is in your side is solid yellow, that means passing is not permitted on this side. And in some locations where the side distance is good enough for the 2 directions, you would see, as you could see here, the middle portion of this highway, the passing is permitted in 2 ways. When it comes to the rural highway markings, the standard center line markings for 2-lane highways, we're having 3 types of center line markings. The very first one is single dashed yellow line. We're having double solid yellow line. We have double yellow line, 1 solid and 1 dashed. So as I mentioned before, for the single dashed yellow line, this really signifies that passing is permitted from either lane. While if we have double solid yellow line, this signifies that passing is prohibited from either lane. And in some other cases where we're having now double yellow line, 1 solid and 1 dashed, this signifies that the passing is permitted for the lane adjacent to the dashed yellow line, and that passing is really prohibited from the lane adjacent to the solid yellow line. So here's three different cases, and we see those 3 cases repetitively in rural highways between single dash yellow line, which you can just, if the geometric design of the road is very good and you have a high side distance, then passing in both directions would be allowed, and therefore we have single dash yellow line. And while in other cases where the geometric design, in the other extreme scenario where it's very mountainous and you can't really pass the cars in front of you in either direction, then we're having 2 solid lines that it's just you cannot pass at this section of the highway by any means. While the most common one is really a combination of between having a yellow line, 1 solid and 1 dashed, depending on the available side distance from each side of from each travel side. This is here another picture for rural highway markings. There are 2 types, as you could see here. The type A is typical 3-lane 2-way markings with passing permitted in single lane direction, while the other case is typical 3-lane 2-way marking with passing prohibited in a single lane direction. So as you can see from these 2 types of markings, we have to assign 2 lanes to one direction and 1 lane to the other, while we can alternate the assignment at the appropriate intervals and location. This is here become now more design procedure rather than just the recommendations when it comes to rural highway markings. As you could see here, at the direction of the center lane in a 3-lane alignment must periodically alternate. And we see this in so many cases where the rural highway is basically 3 lanes, 1 lane per direction, and the middle lane would keep changing back and forth between one direction to the other direction. And while we're doing this transition, we have to have a special transition marking must be provided at these locations. So our job as traffic engineers, we have to design the length L, this L here. This is the transition. This is the length of the taper marking, where how long we should give the driver time to decrease the number of lanes from 2 lanes all of a sudden to 1 lane here, and vice versa on the other side, where now instead of having 2 lanes, and now it's going to be 1 lane. So that L for speed limit of 70 miles or more, it's basically this L, the length of that taper is W times S. What's W? W is the width of the center lane, and S is the 85th percentile speed or speed limit. So for example, if I'm exactly at speed limit of even 80 miles per hour, so 80 miles per hour times the width in feet, so 80, for example, times 12 feet, that would be 960 feet. So if we say that we're having an 80 miles per hour, 80 times 12 feet, that's again gonna give us 960 feet, which is the length of the taper. How about what happened to this length if the speed limit is way lower? If we're having now a lower speed, let's say at a rural highway the speed was 50 instead of 80. So now the length is going to be 12 times 50, and that would be the length of the taper is going to drop to 600 feet rather than 960 feet. Other distance, which is the distance B. This distance B in the drawing shows us that this is the buffer distance, and it has to be at least 50 feet long. So it has to be 50 feet long. Also, there is special markings for ramp junction. So the ramp junction markings at all freeway interchanges and all types of rural highways at locations where grade separated interchanges are provided, we have to have those markings. And there are 2 basic designs when it comes to ramp junction markings. One is parallel deceleration lane, which is more common, as you could see in picture A here. This is the parallel deceleration lane. So by the time we're approaching an exit, and instead of having 2 lanes per direction, now we're introducing a 3rd lane long enough to let the driver now shift to that far right lane, drive for a little bit until the exit. While the other type of ramp junction markings and design is a tapered deceleration lane. So instead of having an assigned lane for the ones who are going to take the exit, now we're going to have more or less like a tapered deceleration lane. The lane now is much smaller, but the gore area here is bigger. And even the marking, as you could see, those are optional chevron markings. And the gore area, the gore area has to be more and bigger, because the amount of confusion for drivers in option B is going to be more compared to option A, where the drivers now are going to adjust themselves, drive in this left and the far right lane before they get to exit. But here really they don't have that much chance, and then instead they're going to have to have this gore area bigger for the confused drivers. But I hope now you see that there's a difference in markings. Here we're having dotted lines, dotted white lines, longer ones for the entire added lane for the ones who are going to exit, while here the gore area is marked and there is a more area compared to here, because here we don't need it that much, because drivers already know that they're going to exit after they've driven at least 0.2 to 0.5 miles in the added right lane. So as I was saying, so for the ramp junction markings, the gore area is delineated with channelizing lines. As you can see here, we're having this line, for example, in example A, parallel deceleration lane, to indicate that if the drivers are late and they didn't make the turn before this continuous white line, they cannot make it anymore, and they are encouraged now to continue and look for the next exit. The interior of the gore area is often marked with chevron markings at off-ramps, and especially again when it comes to option B, when we have tapered deceleration lane and the driver doesn't have that much of time. You see now we don't have the continuous white line here because the driver doesn't have that much time and distance to make that transition. That's why the gore area is bigger, and we're having lots of markings here indicating that this is a gore area and you have to make a decision whether to exit or to continue on the highway. When it comes to on-ramp junctions are similarly marked, except that the chevron markings are not used here in the interior of the gore area. Same thing, now you are trying to enter the highway, so there are two types of markings and two types of designs here. Cars would get into this ramp and then they would have their own right lane for some extended amount of time and length before they join in the mainstream of the traffic. And therefore, in this case, as you could see, we're having the markings again. The cars getting into this on ramp, they are kind of protected by having this continuous line. So the cars trying now to get to the right, the far right, they cannot do it until this point. So once the cars now get in, they're gonna have a good time and a good length of the roadway to join the stream, while here sometimes it's kind of restricted, as you could see. If we don't have enough space or enough right of way, we can do this tapered acceleration lane, where now we're introducing the lane far ahead before the cars join the stream, because by the time they join the stream they don't have that much time to merge into the mainstream of the traffic. And as you can see again, the markings is a little bit different between the two cases, but neither of them were not using the chevron markings anymore when it comes to the on-ramp junction rather than the off-ramp junctions. When it comes now to establishing and posting speed limits, the MUTCD requires the posting of speed limit sign at certain locations. First of all, it has to be posted at points of change from one speed limit to the another. So as I was always say, if you are driving from here to Dallas, and if you're driving on I-20, and once now you're changing from I-20 to US 80, the speed would drop from 75 miles per hour to 70 miles per hour. That's why at that fork you would see the speed limit has to be posted there right away to let the driver that the speed limit now is changing, whether it's increasing or decreasing, but we have to put and post a speed limit right there. Another requirement from the MUTCD were to place speed limits. We have to have those speed limits signed and posted beyond the major intersections and at other locations where it is necessary to remind drivers of the speed limit. For example, we have to have the speed limit posted within 1,000 feet of a major entry locations. We have to have a speed limit sign placed at all borders between states. Sign indicating the speed limit of the state being entered should be placed. Sometimes you would drive on the same interstate, but one state is having higher speed limit standards than the other, or even lower. So by the time you cross the borders between one state to the other, you have to have a speed limit placed there. Also, you have to have a speed limit sign should be set at the 85th percentile of the speed of free flow traffic, rounded to the nearest 5 miles per hour. This is just, again, it's not really give you an idea of the posting, but how to establish the speed limit. To establish a speed limit is, as we discussed in the lab, it's about 85th percentile of the speed of free flow traffic, and then we round it to the nearest 5 miles per hour. Another points here while we're establishing and trying to post the speed limits, there are several factors that really lower the speed limit less than the 85th percentile of the free flow speed or the free flow traffic. Some of these factors are the design speed of the facility section. So in some cases, again, this facility section has some other requirements, such as geometric design restraints that we cannot allow higher than 85th percentile, so we can drop it less than the 85th percentile of the free flow traffic. Another factor that lower the speed limit less than 85th percentile is the presence of any details of the roadway geometry, including side distances, or the roadway and roadside development intensity and roadway environment. Also, if we're having any lots of accident experiences at this location, we should decrease the speed limit at this location even less than the 85th percentile of free flow speed. And the last factor that can affect the speed limit and that can affect the speed limit by lowering it less than the 85th percentile is the observed pace speed. So if we go and do a speed study and we calculate the pace, which is the 10-mile increment with the highest percentage of drivers, if the pace is telling us that the pace speeds are less than the 85th percentile, we can drop it to the observed pace speed. Additional speed limits also may be set, and we need to post them as follows. If we have a truck speed limit, we have to post it. If we have a night speed limit, also if we have a minimum speed limits, all those has to be posted whenever it's needed. But the general rule of thumb here, we cannot have more than 3 speed limits posted at any single location. So you cannot have more than 3, and so that means you cannot combine more than 3 speeds basically. With this, we finish this portion of the chapter 17, and we'll continue the other portion of chapter 17 later on. Thank you so much.